Put my phones on mute.
The phones.
The phones. Both of them. Silent mode on. Okay. I'm ready. Give people a couple minutes here to join in and we'll get started.
Well, all right. We already got a nice little cluster of viewers. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Facebook Live. We're also live on Click Meeting. So if you want to interact directly with Matt, I'm going to post the link to our Click Meeting room, and you can get in there and you can hop into a chat, and Matt can see all your questions directly. Or feel free to keep watching here on Facebook, and I'll kind of feed those questions over to Matt through Click Meeting. But other than that, we're just going to be talking today about the brand new X-T4, the flagship of the Fuji lineup. And we've got Matt, our fantastic tech rep, here to really kind of talk to us about the differences between the X-T4 and its predecessor, the X-T3. So with no further ado, Matt, thanks so much for being here, and take it away, sir.
Hey, awesome. Thank you guys all for joining us. And like you said, basically, we're going to be talking about the X-T4 today. I'm going to go over pretty much everything you could even think of about it. I do have one here with me, so I'll be kind of pointing to it and everything. If you can see my picture in the corner, I believe you have the ability to kind of dock that or change the size, drag it around. But then also the presentation on the screen here. So let's just go ahead and get started. So first, just talking about the availability. So right now you can go out and buy a body. Precision has those available, and they've been selling them since Monday. So the price on that is $16.99, and you of course have your option of black or silver, which I'll show you here in just a second. And then the two kit options. So kind of the old kit option being the 18 to 55. I say old just because that lens has been available for a while. It's the kit lens that we included with the X-T2, with the X-T3 at launch for that camera. And then later in last year, we launched the 16 to 80 lens. And we actually came out with a new kit available for the X-T3, quite a while after the launch of the camera itself. So this one, with it being available at launch, of course, you have both options there. You'll notice there's only a $100 price difference. We'll talk a little bit about weather sealing. This image gives you some foreshadowing as far as the weather sealing, but we'll talk about that in a second. And keep in mind these two lens kit options for that as well. So here are the two different colors, the kind of retro, kind of classic looking silver option, and then the standard photographer in the shadows, all black option. Of course, all your wedding photographers, street photographers and stuff tend to be edge a little bit more towards the discrete black option. I will say a lot of people also go with black because the white lettering and everything that you see on the top of the camera is much more legible. There's more contrast when you have the white lettering on the black background. The silver the silver has black lettering on it, as you can see on the front of the camera there. But on those smaller numbers and letters on the top, if you have a hard time reading small print, this could make it even a little bit harder on you. So it's more than just an aesthetic choice. But I do also have several points throughout the presentation. I'm going to draw comparisons to something that you may have already gotten a chance to touch and feel and hold and play with, which is our X-T3. So as you see in the top right-hand corner, I've got the X-T4 and the X-T3. And this first chart just is talking about the size. So we do have some new features, a new battery, new image stabilization system that are in the X-T4 that required it to be a little bit bigger. You can see the difference is just a couple of millimeters in width, 5 millimeters in depth, and then a little bit of weight as well, so 68 grams. Not too much. It's really not too much bigger or heavier. This is actually my old X-T2, but the X-T2 body is the same as the X-T3 body. They didn't physically change size between those two cameras, and now they have. So I was just going to kind of give you guys a comparison there. They really are still fairly comparable in size. And of course, there's images out there that can show you more detailed versions of what I'm doing for you here. But let's move on and talk about that weather sealing. So of course the camera body, as with the previous XT models, XT3, XT2, even our X Pro and our XH1, those are all weather sealed. And one thing to keep in mind when you're looking at getting a weather sealed camera system or weather resistant camera system is that it's only weather resistant if the lens attached to it is weather resistant as well. So Fujifilm actually will print, all these letters that go around the outside, numbers and letters to tell you kind of information about the lens. Included in there is going to be a WR for weather resistant. So you can just look at a lens, or it's also printed on the box of the lens, and see if it is a weather resistant lens or not. The 16 to 80, beyond just giving you a little bit more range than the 18 to 55 and the constant aperture and the improved optical stabilization, it is also weather sealed where the 18 to 55 is not. So keep that in mind when you're making your choice on which kit you might pick up. Some of the physical changes in the camera itself. Let's start just kind of from that top left corner. We'll talk about the drive dial. So that's underneath your ISO dial. Kind of two dials stacked up here. That's a similar way that it's been done on the previous models, but some of the options on the drive dial itself have changed. So we used to have a multiple exposure option on this far end that you can see even now in the picture. It says HDR there. So HDR is a new feature. We're going to talk more in depth about that as a feature later in the presentation, but it's worth noting that has changed the position of the physical dial. And the other thing that's over here that normally if you go all the way to the other end of that drive dial, that's where you would find your video mode. And that also is missing. So multiple images stacking on top of each other and video have both changed position. So that brings us over to the other side here. So the shutter speed dial on the top and what was underneath on the X-T3, X-H1, X-T2 was what we call photometry, what a lot of people call metering modes. And you would change that with that sub dial. And now you can see on the image here that it's got an option for movie, and that one that's kind of obscured by the viewfinder is the still mode. So it's just a simple switch back and forth between stills and video. And we will, of course, talk more about basically how that changes the interface. It's not just the fact that we changed the movie selection from the drive dial to this side. We added a lot more features to kind of streamline using both video and stills and switching back and forth, since a lot of shooters are doing that these days. If you're familiar with the back of an X-T2 or X-T3, you'll notice also that these two buttons have changed. The AF on button is something that people have kind of been requesting for quite a while. The old method on the X-T2, X-T3 was an AEL and an AFL button. So those are auto exposure lock and autofocus lock. But by default, out of the box, if you half press the shutter release, the camera will find focus, it will lock focus, and it will lock exposure simultaneously with that half press. So you don't actually need to use those buttons unless you choose to. And so a lot of people kind of never used them. We decided to give you some things that you could use. So back button focus being a popular way of focusing, we've given you that nice autofocus on button, AF on button, that does protrude out a little bit more. It's easy to feel even when you have the camera pressed against your face. And then slightly more recessed is the Q button on the side. So every camera has a Q button. Some of them have it located on this outer edge here. And we've had people kind of have issues with accidentally pressing that Q button and having the quick menu come up and cover the screen. So we've changed the location, so it's much less prone to being accidentally pressed, and it is a little bit larger and easier to find there on that corner as well. Everything here is pretty much the same. You still have your directional pad. I'll mention that because there are several cameras that do not have a directional pad anymore. So it's been kind of a back and forth debate between whether we want this area as basically a purchase for your thumb to kind of grip the camera without having any chance of accidentally pressing buttons, or if you actually need to have that directional pad. So the X100V, the X Pro 3, they don't have that D-pad anymore, but the X-T4 does still have it. In case you haven't picked up on the pattern here, I've highlighted any of the new features for the X-T4 in yellow. So those are mostly the ones that we're going to talk about. The locking eyepiece is a neat feature. And so basically before there was just a piece of plastic on the bottom that would clip underneath the bottom side of the viewfinder and keep it in place. Now there's actually a locking mechanism that's built in on the inside on both sides of the viewfinder cup itself. And there's little buttons on either end that you press in to get it to slide off. And it's a much more tactile, more affirmative locking piece. And it's just kind of a quality of life improvement. And then the last but certainly not least is our very angled touchscreen, or what some of you might call a full articulating screen. So you can of course close it, giving you just the hard protective plastic backing, or you can turn around and close it for just your standard LCD screen. And then as you're seeing me do it on each side, you can do a full tilt all the way down for selfie mode, or you can do high angle and low angle tilts as well. So any angle you need there. Moving on to the front of the camera. Not quite as much changes here. We've upgraded this strap cover, so basically the way that the camera strap attaches and the little cover that keeps the metal from rubbing on the metal of the strap attachment from rubbing on the metal of the body has a better design to it. And then also the sync cap. So that's one thing that a lot of people would lose. So this is for syncing with certain types of flash units and everything like that. And there's a little plastic cap that threads in there that if you don't keep up with it, it can back itself out, and then of course you can lose it. That is vital to the weather sealing of the camera, so it's important that it stays in. We've improved that so that it is better at staying in place. And then the grip, along with it being a larger camera, slightly deeper, we've also given you a slightly deeper grip and gives you more purchase on the camera as well, so that you have a little bit more to hang on to. And then lastly, we're going to look at the top of the camera. So there is a new shutter release. It looks the same, but it feels different. And that is one of those things that you'll have to wait until you get the camera in your hands to really experience. But it is a nice affirmative half press and then full press of the shutter. And the rest of the top of the camera should look pretty familiar to anybody who's used an X-T2 or X-T3. I will say that one of the things that we've been upgrading on the newest models is this diopter. So that clicks out. You kind of pull it out in order to unlock it, kind of like a watch dial. And then you can rotate it to adjust it for your eye. And then when you click it back in, it's locked in place. So it doesn't accidentally change that dioptric adjustment when you're pulling it out of a camera bag or something. So that's not new to this camera, but it is a relatively new feature to our cameras as a whole. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the ports and some changes there. So we did talk about the drive mode. You can see a closer picture of it there. Notice there's no video on this end, and there's HDR here instead of multiple exposures. We will talk about HDR mode when we talk about some of the new features in the camera. But as we kind of mentioned here, it is available in RAW, which is a unique feature. That's something that not a lot of manufacturers offer when we're talking about in-camera HDR. On the left side of the camera, if you're looking at it like you're going to take a picture, the top port area has your 3.5mm mic jack and a 2.5mm remote port, and it is kind of covered with basically like a rubber sealing cover. And then below that, on the lower left-hand side of the screen, you can see your HDMI and your USB-C. So the USB-C is how you charge the camera. You can charge it. It's more versatile because you can charge with the cord that comes with the camera, just like this. So USB-C to USB-C, and then the two-prong for the United States is actually, that's a removable piece, and you can put pieces for other countries in there as well. But then you can also use a USB-C cord to charge the camera from a battery. So the one that we recommend on our website is the Anchor Power Core, and there's two different sizes or capacities of those. But really, I've seen people using different brands that work just fine as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about power options and battery later. And then on the right side of the camera, you'll see that we have changed the SD slots as well. So they used to be kind of stacked, sort of staggered on top of each other. They're now separated out so that you can very clearly see which one is card slot 1, which one is card slot 2. They are hot swappable, which means that you can change them while the camera's on. You do want to make sure that it's not using that card when you try to change it. So there's a little light right here, and this is on most of our cameras. There's a little light on the thumb grip that will light up whenever the camera is trying to write images to the SD card. So you want to make sure that that's off, and then feel free to swap them with the camera on. Both slots are UHS 2 slots. So if you're shooting any high speed action or anything like that, make sure that you're using the faster cards, UHS 2 cards. And then as you can see here, this is the door that I've taken off to show you guys the side slot there. So if you're using the camera with a drone or a gimbal or putting it inside of a cage or something like that, you can easily just take that door off. All right. So this one's kind of an overview of pretty much a lot of the different things that you'll see on the spec sheet, but we're going to go a little bit more of a deep dive into what they are and why they matter. So a couple of things I want to point out on this slide are the -6 EV. So the X-T3 was already a dramatic increase in phase detection capability. It was the first one to use phase detection across the entire sensor, and low light focusing really was already dramatically improved from the previous model, the X-T2, or even the X-H1. And this has, even though the sensor and processor have stayed the same on this one, so we're on our 4th generation processor and sensor, all of these improvements on the X-T4 are rather astounding. So they have changed some other physical pieces inside of the camera with circuitry and boards and things like that to allow for better performance. And along with that is this low light autofocus. So we had -3 EV on the X-T3. We now have -6 EV on the X-T4. Of course, the X-T3 didn't have any in-body image stabilization, but if we were to go back to the last one that did, that was the X-H1. I actually have a chart coming up that will do a comparison for you, but we're looking at 6.5 stops of in-body image stabilization. And then you can add digital image stabilization on top of that. So digital image stabilization is a new feature for the X-T4, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Along with that same mechanism is a new shutter. The new shutter is capable of up to 15 frames per second mechanically. You'll see oftentimes manufacturers, advertising that they can shoot 20 frames per second. But what they're not telling you is that that is an electronic shutter only. That's usually not in the big bold print. And if you go to mechanical, you oftentimes get something like 8 or 10 frames per second. So 15 frames per second is, while not the fastest camera in the world, it's right on up there with them. And then 30 frames per second is available in electronic shutter. So that also is right on up there with the fastest cameras in the world. We do have a new battery. We have a couple slides. We'll talk about that. The new battery basically is just a bigger, more efficient battery. And then that new screen, not only is it a vari-angle screen, which I showed you a minute ago, but it also is a dramatic increase in resolution. So the X-T3 screen at the same size, 3 inches, was just over 1 million dots, or 1 megapixel, if you want to think of it that way, 1 million pixels. And this one is 1.62, so approaching double the resolution. And then, of course, this is the viewfinder that was originally in the GFX, a very nice high resolution, clear OLED viewfinder, so almost 4 million dots of resolution on that one. When it comes to the upgraded photo features and the upgraded video features, this is kind of a preview of something that we're going to talk about later, but dramatic improvement in autofocus, some new film simulations, and some new modes, faster performance when it comes to video recording, and better output as well. Some new profiles that we'll share with you guys. So let's talk about the first thing that most people are already aware of is the IBIS. So X-T3, X-T2, anything like that, of course, did not have IBIS, or even if you're an X-Pro shooter, those don't have IBIS either. So this is just the second camera in the lineup for X series to have in-body image stabilization, and they've really outdone themselves. So on the image that you see on the lower right, the left is the XH1 unit with the sensor and the stabilization unit attached. The one on the right is the one out of the X-T4. So they've trimmed it down to make it as small and light as possible to keep the camera small and light. And so it's 30% smaller, 20% lighter. And you still, of course, achieve full 5-axis in-body image stabilization and a dramatic increase up to 6.5 stops of stabilization. So the way that they do that is by using by adding magnets to the stabilization mechanism instead of just using springs. So the new magnetic springs are where that efficiency comes from. And this is that chart that I promised you. So this compares the two IBIS units. So the XH1 on the right-hand side, basically listed out with every lens that we have available. They've been tested to SEPA standards. And as you can see, this first portion covers all of our prime lenses, which don't by default have any stabilization whatsoever. So you're going from no stabilization to 6.5 stops of stabilization on everything except for that 90mm f2 that has 6 stops. But even that is up 1 full stop from the XH1. So everything here was 5, maybe 5.5. It peaked at 5.5, and I believe you only got 5.5 with maybe 3 or 4 of the lenses. You now have 6.5 stops with over half of the lenses. And every single one of them is an improvement. So pretty great information there, and certainly an impressive feat for that new stabilization system. So we're going to go in and give you, of course, we're all photographers here, so what do we want to see? We want to see some images, some proof, visual proof. So the next slide is going to show us a cropped in image. So this is the full image, just so that you can see a scale of how much we're cropping in to show you this next slide. So inside this red box is what we're looking at. We're cropping out a vast majority of the image to get these. And so basically gradually taking down the shutter speed. These are shot handheld with the new X-T4. So the starting with 1/125th of a second, gradually going down to 1/4 of a second here, you can see is still extremely usable. And then they took it one step farther and shot 1 full second here, which looks perfectly sharp to me. And then at 2 seconds, you start to see some motion blur, but you got to remember this is a massively cropped image. So that would still be, if you were using the entire image, the amount of motion blur that you're seeing here at 2 full seconds handheld would still be completely usable for most applications for that image. That's cheating, huh? Yeah, stabilization's pretty cool. And if we're not done yet, I'm actually going to show you some more features on the stabilization, some things that we've added that will maybe make you even feel more that way. You just don't sell your tripods yet, though, folks. I promise they still have a use. All right, so let's move on to the focal plane shutter. So you see the new shutter mechanism here. Along with that stabilization, they of course wanted to make it so that you could hand hold longer shutter speeds, like what we just showed you. So along with that came this new shutter to primarily help reduce shutter shock. So you don't want to have any vibrations inside the camera that would introduce motion blur into the image. So but kind of a nice secondary effect to reducing that shutter shock is that it also becomes 30% more silent. And we'll show you, I'm actually going to give you a comparison here in just a second. They gave us a clip, which I'll play for you, but I'll also do a comparison between my two cameras that I have here. One of the other things that's certainly worth mentioning on the new shutter mechanism is that the durability is rated to 300,000 shutter actuations, which is astounding. That's twice what the X-T3 shutter was rated for. We didn't really publicize that. 150,000 is what it was rated for. And that's kind of standard amongst most professional cameras in the industry. So 300,000 is a pretty astounding number. And then last but not least, speed. So we mentioned that up to 15 frames per second in mechanical. Again, I'm going to play that for you here in a second. I'm going to shoot some images and let you listen to just how fast that is. So here's the video from Fujifilm. I'll play that for you. Maybe I won't play that for you. I guess that might be a click meeting thing. This is the first video I've tried playing in this click meeting interface. And maybe when I uploaded my my presentation, the video didn't carry over. Is it on YouTube? It is not, not that I know of, at least. So that's okay. We'll skip past that. Like I said, the way that I prefer to do it anyways is actually to give you an example side by side, since playing the video and hearing the shutter, depending on the type of speakers that you're using or the type of connection you might have or how much you might have your speakers turned up, it's going to kind of sound different. But one thing that will give you an indication of how much quieter it is to have the two side by side. So this is the older shutter mechanism. So you guys can hear that. And then this is the X-T4. And that's a single. I'm going to put it in continuous for you. So quite a dramatic change in both sound and speed. Pretty cool. And of course, we look forward to getting out there in person and letting you guys hear that for yourselves in real life. So let's move on and talk about the new battery. So I do have both of them here. This is that 126S that if you've been shooting Fuji in the last few years, you probably have a few of these. And it was one of the, honestly, the X-T3 got such great reviews that one of the only things that people found to write about was that the battery didn't last quite as long as they would have hoped for. So we fixed that. This is the new W235 battery, and as you can see, it is quite a bit larger and allows for quite a bit more capacity. So speaking of capacity, we not only increased the size of the battery, but we also gave you some new options. So there is an economy mode that allows you to maximize the number of frames that you get. I also want to point out here, because this is one thing that a lot of times people just sort of assume, that the EVF, since it's smaller, actually allows you to get more frames. Surprisingly enough, because of how high of resolution that OLED EVF is, you actually get more frames out of the battery when you're using the LCD. So that's a note worth taking. And of course, that will change from camera to camera, but in the X-T4 specifically, you do get more frames from the LCD. So this bottom part of this graph is with the grip. We'll talk a little bit more about the grip and how that works here in just a second. There we go. So this is the new grip. And I do get the question already if the grip from the older camera will work. As we talked about at the beginning, It is a completely re-engineered body. It's not the same size, and it doesn't have the same connection. So, and it doesn't use the same battery. So, no, it will not work. This is the new grip that is compatible with the X-T4. Sells for $329.99. One of the things that Fujifilm has done with most of their grips that I've always loved is that there's two slots in here. So this tray holds two batteries. You get two batteries in the grip, and then the cool part is that you don't have to take the grip or take the battery out of the camera. So you end up with a total of three. Most grips in the industry will either give you one in the grip and one in the camera, or none in the camera and two in the grip. This gives you all three. And so especially with that newer, larger battery, you're looking at quite a bit of extended shooting time. As far as ports go, so right next to that little release lever that we have there is the headphone jack. So there's a 3.5mm headphone jack there. It's worth mentioning that if you don't shoot with the grip and you want to use headphones, that USB-C port that I showed you at the beginning, we do actually include a USB-C to 3.5mm adapter that allows you to plug in your headphones and monitor audio. On the back here, we also have a performance selector switch. So as we showed on the last slide, there is an economy mode. The normal mode is just basically that kind of run-of-the-mill standard operation. Economy cuts performance down a little bit, but extends battery life. And then boost will actually ramp the performance up a little bit, but it does reduce battery life. So it kind of depends on the type of shooting that you're doing and how concerned you are about how long your battery is going to last. Other than that, you have all the same controls that a normal vertical grip would have. It replicates all the controls that you have when you're holding the camera this way. It's worth mentioning that this is a little bit taller this way, and that's just to accommodate those larger batteries that have to fit in there. So this grip is a little bit taller than the previous grips from the X-T2 or X-T3. All right, so I mentioned earlier that the X-T4 does come with the USB-C charger that will charge the battery in the camera. It's worth mentioning, since we were just talking about the grip, that if you plug this into the side of the camera and you have that grip attached with two batteries in there, you can just leave it plugged in and it will charge all three of those batteries simply by plugging it into the camera. So that's definitely convenient, charging three batteries without having to run back and forth and check and see if one's finished charging to start charging the next one. Along with that, we are launching for the first time a dual charger. So this is a separate accessory that will be available. And we call it a BCW235. It'll sell for $69.99. And as you can see in the picture, it holds two W235 batteries. And there's a couple of new features there as well. So the port is the USB-C. So you will actually use this same cord to plug into that dual charger or into the camera for either data transfer or charging. And so data transfer with the camera, of course, and charging with either the camera or the battery charger. And then the screen on top will display the charging status. So whereas our traditional method of that is you put the battery on there and it will turn on a green light if the battery is charging, and it will turn off that light when it's done charging. But what it doesn't do is tell you how charged it is. So if you're in a situation where you need to take a battery off before it's charged, or if you're not sure if a battery needs charging, you can pop it in there and it will give you a status symbol or a status percentage of how charged that battery is. Definitely a welcomed improvement. All right, so this is that vari-angle LCD, which I did show off, kind of all the tilting directions and everything like that. We talked about the increased resolution, yeah, basically this just gives you a chart side by side between the X-T3 and the X-T4. You can see they are the same size, same aspect ratio. There's that jump in resolution I was referencing earlier. And of course, you get that vari-angle screen as opposed to the three-way tilting screen on the X-T3. They are both touchscreens. And we'll move on and talk about the viewfinder. So the smaller screen that's found inside of the viewfinder here. It is that 3.69 million dot OLED EVF, and this also has some different modes to either capitalize on the extended battery life or better performance. But even under performance, I guess we'll talk about. So economy, you can see slower autofocus speeds, slower LCD frame rates, so the refresh rate of that LCD. It will enable a automatic power saving after 12 seconds, and that's where you get maximum battery life. The normal doesn't have that auto power save, and it does still maintain 60 frames per second for refresh rate. You get a little bit less performance out of the battery. And then coming into the fun part, at least for me, is the different boost options that we've enabled. So turning on any of the boost modes will shorten the autofocus time. So quicker autofocus speeds, 0.02 seconds across all three of those. And then you can see they're kind of geared towards different types of shooting. So we've got low light, we've got resolution, and we've got frames per second or FPS. So low light will give you a slower refresh rate on the viewfinder and on the screen, the LCD screen, and that's just to allow for more time for light to be gathered for your preview. So that, think of it just like a shutter speed for taking a picture. This allows for a longer shutter speed, if you want to think of it that way, to be able to give you that preview brighter when you're in low light. And then for resolution, this actually doesn't show up on the chart here, but this just gives a emphasis to accurate detail. So if you're shooting something like macro or product photography where detail is key and you want to make sure that you're getting things tack sharp and things like that, resolution is the option, the boost option that you would want to select. And then the last one is frames per second. So that, of course, is your wildlife, sports, any fast-moving subjects. If you're trying to move and pan along with a fast-moving subject, having a faster refresh rate on that EVF will help you to accurately see what you're capturing. So, and keep up with those subjects. So 100 frames per second there on the refresh rate. Moving on down to the upgraded photo features. So I did have a couple of videos that I was going to show you that I assume will not work. We might as well test it. Yep, nope, they don't work. And that's just from this interface that we're using here. So I can talk a little bit about them. So the advanced face and eye detection. So face and eye detection was something that was available before. And you would see this green box whenever it finds the face and the white box when it finds the eye. And what this video, you'll have to sort of take my word on it, but what this video shows is the subject here picks up on the face and eye. He actually leaves the frame, re-enters, it very quickly reacquires the face and eye. He even moves back into the frame and becomes much smaller, and it maintains face and eye detection the entire time. They're showing this in a video mode, but it works just as well in stills. Really, the improvement is in video mode, so where it has to stay with him 100% of the time, or it really doesn't work. So that's definitely an improvement there. And the other example that we normally will show is the wide tracking. So this is not face detection, even though they're putting it on a face. It really will work with any subject. And so you have a white box that you'll put on your subject, and then as you focus, half press, it will turn green. It'll find focus on that subject. And then even if you're shooting or just maintain half press, it will move if that subject moves, or it will stay on the subject if your camera moves. And so in this video, he actually leaves the frame, comes back in. You can see it takes a little while to focus to the background, but the second that he re-enters, it snaps right back to him. And the second time when he comes back through, he's really like running through the frame, and it keeps right up with him. All right. So moving on into those upgraded photo features. So auto white balance, we have some new white balance priorities. So auto white balance is still there, just the same as it always has been. The new ones are basically giving priority to different things. So one is an ambient priority, which looks at the ambient color of the light, and bases the white balance off of that. And the other option is a white priority. So it looks for a white subject or the closest it can find to white and focuses on making that white. So a good application of that would be like wedding photography, where if you're shooting somebody, you're photographing somebody in a wedding gown, it's got to be white. And really, it doesn't matter what color everything else is. If that wedding dress comes out yellow or blue or anything like that, it's just not right. You want to have that white. So white priority would be a good option for that. Precise tone adjustment. So that's this image that we have on the bottom. So this is a monochromatic image. It is still monochromatic. It's just now purple. So this would have been shot as a black and white image, and then you can go and shift your tone adjustment. Basically, in any image, you can go and do a precise tone adjustment. You have an entire color wheel where you can shift the tones in post in camera. We have also upgraded our in-camera RAW conversion. So the X-T3, as our former model, our benchmark, if you will, was able to do in-camera RAW conversion from a RAW file to a JPEG, and then you could transfer it via Wi-Fi to a cell phone or tablet or something. So that was nice and useful. You now can actually in-camera convert to an 8-bit or a 16-bit TIFF, which previously was only available on our GFX models. So it's nice to see that added to an X series camera. I mentioned earlier the multiple exposures being removed from the drive mode. It's been moved into the camera, into the menu. And so one of the reasons that we did that is so that we could expand on the features of the multiple exposure. So it used to just be 2 frames. One frame you shoot, and then it shows you sort of that frame translucent as you frame your second frame and take that picture, and then it just stacks them at basically 50% opacity on top of each other. Now you can do up to 9 frames stacked on top of each other. And along with that, we've added blending modes. So you can bring forth the highlights or the shadows. You can kind of change the way that those images interact with each other as they're stacked on top of each other. We mentioned HDR mode because it's one of the new features on the drive dial, but it's worth mentioning that so some people who have been using Fujifilm cameras have seen the dynamic range boost option, like in the quick menu or in the standard menu. And so what that does is that actually uses the ISO, neighboring ISOs to whatever setting you have to create basically expanded dynamic range in a single image. And it does that, like I said, with a single image. So the result is a single image, but it also only takes one picture and uses ISO to expand dynamic range. The traditional way of doing a high dynamic range image is to shoot multiple frames, so with different shutter speeds, and then combine those in post. So the X-T4 now will combine those for you in camera, and this really is key. This is kind of a part of having that 15 frames per second on the mechanical shutter. So it shoots so fast now that you can do a handheld HDR with 3 different shutter speeds where it will capture those 3 images and stack them for you. And it will give you not just a JPEG, which is what most in-camera HDRs produce. It'll also give you a RAW file that you can go in and tweak afterwards with extremely expanded dynamic range. So this top frame on the right-hand side shows you your HDR options, and that HDR plus, man, I was playing around with that the other day, and it really brings the highlights down and the shadows up and introduces color into the entire image. So you just end up with tons and tons of information that you can play around with. And especially having that in a RAW file is pretty powerful. We've added, so high ISO noise reduction is something that we had in the camera. We've now made it adjustable, so you can tweak that. We've added some of the features like the color chrome FX blue, and some new RAW compression that were available in the X Pro 3. They've now made it into the XT series with the X-T4. There's a battery age in the menu, so you can go and see how your battery is performing and see if it's time to replace a battery maybe. There are expanded mount adapter settings so for any of you guys that like to adapt different brands of lenses to your Fujifilm cameras, we've added some more options for you there. And then the new Q menu settings. So we're going to talk a little bit about this with the video options that we'll go to in just a second. But one of the things that I'll show you real quickly is that in the quick menu, so normally you hit the Q button and it comes up and covers the screen. It's completely opaque, so you can no longer see your image at all. There now is an option for the quick menu to be translucent, so you can still see your framing of your image through the quick menu while you make those adjustments very quickly and then return to framing. Hopefully you don't lose your subject in the time that you're doing that. That translucent menu makes it a little bit easier to stay focused, I guess. Not in the list here, but kind of jammed into the corner, is this autofocus range limiter. So this is the indication that you'll see on the screen when you're setting that up. And so if any of you have used some of our longer telephoto lenses, like our 100 to 400 or the 200 millimeter f2, or even our macro lens, the 80 millimeter, those have switches on the side of the lens that will actually limit the autofocus. And that's just to help the camera find focus more quickly. You're telling it, oh, don't look out there, or don't look here. We're only trying to find things that are far away, or we're only trying to find things that are close. And it just helps eliminate an area of focus for the camera to search for. So you now can do that in the camera, and you can do it with any lens. So when you're starting here, you set a start point and an end point, and you can set it at any range. So you could set it from 5 meters to infinity like you would on the 100 to 400, or you could set it from minimum focusing distance to, like, I think 2.5 meters or something like that, like you can on the 80 millimeter macro. And you're basically, or anything in between. And the anything in between is kind of one of the powerful things. You can just basically tell the camera where to look for a subject. Okay, so moving on to the video features. So along with that switch that you can see in the background there, that's underneath your shutter speeds, when you switch from stills to movie now and hit that menu button, you actually get a completely different menu than what you had before. So you can see the top screen here is the stills menu. You get your image quality, you get your autofocus, manual focus settings, and all of your camera, like, still specific settings. And then now, okay, so it's worth mentioning. On the old menu system, there was like a movie menu settings down here. So we've simplified the still menu by taking out all of the movie settings, and we've simplified the movie menu by taking out all of the still settings. So when you're in the movie option and you hit menu, all you see are the expanded options for video shooting. So it definitely improves that interface and streamlines things regardless of which type of shooting you're doing. Some of the new video features. So Eterna Bleach Bypass is the new film simulation that's available both for stills and for video. I have an image later in the presentation that will kind of show you what that film simulation looks like. That we mentioned the headphone jack via USB-C, so that's a new feature. This one here is kind of a key thing. It's what we're showing in the image on the right-hand side. When you're selecting your frames per second for your video to be recorded in, we now, under full HD, have 240 frames per second. So that's twice the frames per second that were previously available in the X-T3, or really the maximum that has ever been available from a Fujifilm camera. So 240 frames per second. They put here that it's 10 times slow motion. So if you were to play it back at 24 frames per second, which is kind of a standard playback speed, that's what they use for cinema, movies, and things like that. That would be 10 times slower than real life. So you can create some pretty interesting videos with that. F-Log Assist is a new feature to help when you're shooting F-Log, to help see your color space. So this gives you an equivalent preview to a Rec 709 or BT 709. We've also added a new compression format. So using H.264, the ACC option is really prioritized for web usage. So if you were making a video that was going to go straight to YouTube or Facebook or what have you, this would allow you to make the most of your hard drive space on your computer and your memory card space in your camera. And it outputs to a more universal MP4 format, whereas the other options in the camera are the standard MOV. Resizable autofocus points is something that video users have been kind of screaming for a while. It's the same feature that if you shoot stills that you've seen there, where you can take your single autofocus point and adjust the size depending. Really, I suggest that you adjust it based on how much your subject is moving. So if you have a stationary subject, you can make it very small, be very precise for autofocus. But if your subject starts moving, or if you have to move, making that focus point a little bit larger and allowing for more leeway on the photographer or videographer's side to keep that box on the subject is definitely a key feature. Movie optimized controls. So what we're talking about there is basically switching shutter speed, ISO, exposure compensation, all that stuff from these large dials on top that would be near a microphone that could pick up the clicking of those dials to the what we call command dials. So that's these two dials here. And you can use those dials to set these things. Or if you want to, we also have silent movie control that allows you to set everything from the touchscreen, so you really don't interfere with the audio being recorded. There's also a new audio jack option, so you can choose between mic and line to let the camera know whether it's listening basically directly hooked up to a microphone or a line in from a switchboard or something like that. And then the quick menu, we talked about the quick menu before, being able to make a translucent quick menu. Well, one of the other things that we've changed there is kind of similar to the last slide where we talked about independent still menus and video menus. You can also have an independent quick menu for your movie settings. So just that simple switch back and forth between still and movie here, and then a press of the quick menu will bring up a different menu from what you have for stills. And then one of the other things that people have been asking for, so anybody who shoots, weddings, like once in a lifetime type of events, really if you're delivering a professional product, you want to be able to have a backup of the work that you're creating. And so that's something that we've had for stills for a while, where you can shoot and record the same images to card slot 1 and card slot 2. That now is available for video as well. So that requires a little bit more processing power, but it is this is the first camera that we've had that's capable of doing that. So you can have a backup on your second card. Okay, moving on into a little bit more about stabilization. I promised you guys more earlier, and here it is. So we've added on top of the in-body image stabilization, digital image stabilization. So it's abbreviated to be DIS. And these basically mirror what you see in the menu when you're in the video options. And that's why we waited until now to talk about this, because we do add the options. So basically turning on stabilization normally would be IBIS/OIS. So that's combining the functions of the optical image stabilization that might be in your lens and the in-body image stabilization to give you as much stabilization physically as possible. And then we've added the option of stacking digital image stabilization on top of that stabilization. So it uses a 10% crop of the image to basically take the recorded image and shift it around inside of that 10% to further stabilize the image. And then we have an option called IS Mode Boost. And what IS Mode Boost is basically really prioritizing a still image. And there is a warning whenever you go over IS Mode Boost in the menu to make sure that you understand it is not to be used when you're making panning or moving shots. So basically you're trying to turn yourself into a human tripod. and it will really limit the amount. I wish I could show you guys videos. I'm gonna have to keep that in mind for next time. Maybe we can upload them to the Facebook feed where this is going to be available. But it basically is a feature, like I said, for turning yourself into a human tripod, so a stable shot. And along with that, so different crops apply to what all this chart and number and stuff on the side is basically showing you, depending on the recording quality that you're using, so full HD or 4K, different frame rates, frames per second, and then whether you have digital image stabilization off or on, you'll get different amounts of crop. So there's an option in the movie menu that is fix movie crop. And what that does is it just sets it to that 1.29 crop that you would get while shooting 4K with digital image stabilization on, or while shooting 1080p in the high speeds, like 240 frames per second. You're looking at a 1.29 crop there. So this allows you to switch back and forth between shooting your slow-mo stuff and shooting your standard video, and then still have everything framed the same, so that whenever you go to edit and post, you don't have a bunch of different crops to go and try to combine. Skip past these videos, and we'll talk about Eterna. So this is the Eterna film simulation that you've seen before. This was available with the X-T3, X Pro 3. So the new one is a bleach bypass process of Eterna. So it's based on Eterna because it maintains that low saturation. But oftentimes, especially with film, low saturation and low contrast would go hand in hand, and high saturation would also go hand in hand with high contrast. So think like Velvia, that's a high saturation, high contrast film. Eterna is low saturation, low contrast. Well, by doing a processing kind of trick, bleach bypass could take a low contrast or low saturation film and introduce higher contrast. So it's a very unique look, and I don't know where this image came from. The girl looking out the window with the handcuff is kind of weird, kind of creepy. Not my shot, but I guess this low saturation, high contrast does kind of fit the scene. It's a very dramatic look, and certainly an interesting one. So it's yet another tool to have in the color palette options with our film simulations. So at the end, I just kind of want to remind you guys, because this is something that people have been trying to talk to me about ever since the rumors got started on the X-T4, is, with the same sensor and processor, are we really just getting an X-T3 that has in-body image stabilization? And the answer is astoundingly, or astonishingly more than that. More than really I think most people could have even imagined. The negative 6 EV, the HDR, 15 frames per second on the shutter, just a whole bunch of improvements, and we'll basically break those down for you in a side-by-side comparison. So improvements on the screen, improvements on the autofocus, improvements on the low light performance of the autofocus, and dramatic, so like not just small improvements. We're talking about a noticeable improvement, something that you could pick up the camera and tell the difference. 15 frames per second versus 11 for your mechanical shutter. And then even when you're shooting mechanical shutter and talking about wanting to use live view, so the blackout time has been shortened and the frames per second has been raised. So that's a dramatic improvement as well. Our 300 frames for 300,000 frames for the durability of the mechanical shutter. We didn't even mention this earlier, but there is a faster release time for the shutter. So the amount of time between when you press the shutter and when it takes the picture is down 10 milliseconds to 35 milliseconds. And then, of course, our improved battery performance, and last but not least, that in-body image stabilization, which the X-T3 didn't have at all. Now I do want to open it up for questions. I'll let you guys know also. I know some of you are watching on Facebook and can't actually type into the questions that we have here on Click Meeting. But if you want to, this is my Instagram. I've been posting some images that I've taken with the X-T4 if you want to go check them out. And also feel free to reach out, through comments or direct messages and let me know if you have any questions or, need any technical support. That's what I do year round is communicate with dealers and sales staff. And how soon if I pre-order today? All right, Doug, good question. So like I said, at the beginning, if you joined in a little bit late, the X-T4 bodies are available. And as Casey from Precision just chimed in, they're in stock. So those X-T4 bodies are available today. If you want a kit, those will be available on June 1st. And of course, Precision will be able to deliver those to you on that day. Any other options on lenses? I have both of the ones mentioned. Okay, so, well, Deborah, the good news is you can just go ahead and get the body, which is available now. And yep, you got it. Yep. And then, so that'll give you a lower price point for entry, and you can save that money for a lens that isn't included in a kit. I'll kind of hang out here for a few more minutes if anybody... Oh, I see some people typing down there. And also, Casey, if you see anybody putting any questions on the Facebook side of things, if you want to copy and paste them over here, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Will do. So far, just a nice hello from Dan Cooney saying that we love Fuji cameras. So
nice.
We love
Hey,
Fujifilm
Dan.
Pro Photo. It's a great pairing, I gotta say.
Absolutely. Dan, I hope you're doing well. Look forward to seeing you on the other side of this when we can all travel and be in the same place again. Low and high tilting available with LCD flipped out. Yeah, Doug, I'll give you an example of that. So basically, I have it completely closed, so I can't even see my LCD right now. If I wanted to do kind of a high over the head shot, I would pull the screen out to the side and then tilt it down, or a low angle similar, I would just tilt it up. It does keep the screen out to the side. And you bring up a good point. That is one of the things that some people like about the way that we've been doing the tilting screen. The X-T3 does keep, if we're doing low angle, high angle, and even that third vertical, low or high angle, is the screen stays centered on the camera. In order to have that vari-angle screen that goes all the way around, even for selfie mode or to close and have that protected option, the tilting does happen on the side of the camera. How would I compare this model to the X Pro 3 for street photography? Well, so that's an interesting question. I know that the X Pro 3 is extremely popular with street photographers. That look, it's a smaller camera, it's more discreet. I think also it's less imposing. It really embodies that retro film, film camera look, and we all love it for that reason. However, if you're asking me for my personal opinion, I wouldn't hesitate to take an X-T4 for street photography. One of the reasons that I personally can say that is because I really like hand holding longer shutter speeds when I'm shooting street. So maybe I come across a nice architectural image with like maybe some light casting across, some stone or the side of a building or something like that. Or even, like a subway underpass where there's people passing by, or bicycle, guys riding bicycles or cars or something like that. I like to capture the motion of the streets. And, street photography, you still want to be at least somewhat discreet. Or if nothing else, you might be out walking around for a long period of time. So I don't necessarily want to take a tripod to capture those slow shutter speeds. And this in-body image stabilization allows me to do that. I actually have some examples on my Instagram. There's one from New York from a while back where I was shooting with the 10-24 wide angle lens, and it's in New York, and there's this cathedral. I believe it's the St. Patrick's Cathedral, and it's beautiful, but it's in daylight, and the foreground is covered by oak trees, and there's taxi cabs and cyclists and just the standard hustle and bustle of New York going across the street right in front of the cathedral. And so instead of just photographing the cathedral, I wanted to capture kind of the ambiance as well. And in order to do that, I of course turned on the optical image stabilization on the 10-24, which luckily I was shooting a wide lens, so I didn't need a ton of stabilization, but I still had to kind of stabilize myself against a park bench and get down really low and shoot that shot and kind of take several shots before I was able to get one where the cathedral was sharp enough to show that detail, but still with a slow enough shutter speed to capture the motion of what I ended up capturing in one image was a taxi cab and a cyclist kind of side by side with the motion blur. So, certain scenes like that I think are compelling for street photography as well, that the X-T4 would be able to do that maybe the X Pro 3 couldn't. I hope maybe that is useful. All right, have you done a similar presentation on the X Pro 3? Did I miss it? If not, would you consider doing one? So we didn't really do a presentation like this on the X Pro 3 because when the X Pro 3 launched, I just came and saw you guys. So what we normally do with the launch of a new camera is I'll come into Precision Camera and I'll bring the new gear with me and let you guys actually see it and touch it and feel it. And of course, I have this sort of information. A lot of the stuff I just showed you guys actually is, it's not going to show up on the spec sheet. It's not going to show up in a lot of articles and stuff because it's the sort of things that they share with us that we normally don't share with you, and not in written form. But because of the extenuating circumstances, Fujifilm likes to be as transparent as possible anyways. So just being able to share as much information and give you guys a feel of getting to know the camera without actually being able to come and see me and talk to me in person. So this is kind of our approach to solving that problem, I suppose. But would I consider doing one? I absolutely would. The X Pro 3 has been out for a little while now, but I'll talk with the guys at Precision if they think that there's a niche that we can fill by doing an X Pro 3 presentation. I know they've got a few other ideas for presentations, and I know they're also working with some other dealers too, so I don't want to monopolize too much of the time, but yeah, certainly something we can talk about. Looking to upgrade from an X-T2, tough decision which one I'll buy. Okay, so Alex, looks like you're wanting to upgrade from the X-T2 to either an X Pro 3 or an X-T4. Yeah. Yep. I don't envy you on the decision-making side. It's always difficult, but I don't think you could go wrong. I guess with that, if I don't see anybody typing, I don't see any other questions.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Matt, for dropping by virtually and talking us through the X-T4. As a X-T3 shooter myself, I wasn't expecting it to be quite as different and quite as much of a upgrade. So yeah, I'm probably gonna have to buy one now. Thanks for that.
Sorry, Casey. You'll thank me later.
I know. -6 stops of low light autofocus. What?
Yeah, with your concert photography, I know that would make a difference for you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, man, and we'll see you soon as we can. And other than that, make sure to touch base with us. We've got content coming out all the time. We'll definitely have Matt back before too long to talk about something, if not the X Pro 3. So thanks again, guys, and have a great afternoon.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.